This is the Influencer Entrepreneurs Podcast with Jenny Melrose, where I strategize with business owners on how to grow and scale their businesses to hit their income goals. This is episode 222 of the Influencer Entrepreneurs Podcast with Jenny Melrose. Today, I am interviewing Lucas O'Keefe, who is going to be talking to us about how to leverage Instagram features in order to grow a community. This is the Lucas O'Keefe that I keep talking about. And I didn't just say the Lucas O'Keefe like that for a silly reason, but because that's his handle on Instagram. He has been able to grow over the past 10 months to over 50,000 followers on Instagram, where 10 months ago, he was at like 1,400 followers. And he is doing it in a way that is driving community, making it organic growth. And he is one that you are definitely going to want to make sure that you follow. I also want to make sure that if you haven't already grabbed my Instagram engagement guide, that you do so. Send me a DM on Instagram and just let me know that you want that Instagram engagement guide, and I will be sure to send it to you. All right, you guys, let's dive into this episode. Hi, Lucas. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good. I am so excited to have this conversation. I mentioned to you beforehand before we hit record, but I have been using your profile to send tons of people to Instagram because you are just so knowledgeable about Instagram and how to use it to the best of its ability. So will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your business? And then we're really going to just dive into how to leverage Instagram features to grow that community.
Sounds good. My name's Lucas O'Keefe. My background is as a school teacher. So I've been a school teacher for the last 6 years. Tons of overlap, actually, though, in coming into the realm of social media from that background. There's always, I think I heard it from Gary Vee, but he says, whatever is on the phones, whatever apps are on the phone of today's 14-year-olds are going to take the world by storm. And he's absolutely right. So just constantly hearing about my students talking about the latest social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, all the updates and whatnot, and all the trends, I started to do some investigation myself. Always having that interest as well. And over the past 2 or 3 years have just pivoted to becoming a social media strategist myself, mainly focusing on Instagram, but delivering just tips, tricks, and trends that are going to help entrepreneurs really build that brand, build that audience that is going to get that know, like, and trust factor so they can sell their digital products in that space. So I typically create products myself that have to do with content creation that are going to really help many different entrepreneurs really build their brand and build that audience themselves so they can do the same thing in their niche.
I love that you talked about your more or less getting all of your content and ideas of where to investigate from your students. I don't know if you're aware, but I used to be a former inner city school district teacher. And I think that's part of the reason I keep recommending, because of the way that you teach. You teach like a teacher. So for my audience, anyone that's listening, if you're not following Lucas on Instagram yet, you obviously need to go do that, because our styles are very similar, and that teacher wanting to make sure you truly understand how to give a mini lesson and take it and put it into action. That's exactly what you're doing. This makes so much more sense to me now of why I'm always looking at your account.
And the number of teachers who I've discovered in this overall niche on social media doesn't surprise me now that I think about it, because people always ask me how my teaching background kind of lent itself to where I am now. And I say it's all just communication, right? If you can convince a class of 30 middle schoolers to that the lesson is going to be fun, they're going to be invested, they're going to enjoy themselves, it's going to be worth it, then you can do the same for a social media audience and telling them why your content is worth following and why your content is worth learning about. So just the overlap and how you have to pitch yourself and sell yourself as a teacher is so similar to on social media, in my opinion.
Yes. No, I totally agree. It is. You're absolutely right. So your Instagram handle, just so that, because I know they're going to be listening and going, well, I want to see what she's talking about, is at the Lucas O'Keefe, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I wanted to make sure. I thought it was the in the beginning, and I wanted to make sure they know that. So we're going to talk really about Instagram, because it's definitely my favorite now, for a long time has been. one of the things that I love about Instagram are all of the features that it actually has. They kind of like stole everyone else's.
Right.
So let's talk about the main features of Instagram. What are those?
And I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Instagram, in my opinion, has really carved out that position as the all-around perfect business platform, right? Obviously for personal use as well, but we're mostly talking business here. And in my opinion, it has every possible feature you will need while still having okay organic reach, which is a huge factor to consider because we do see that obviously fluctuating from platform to platform. That's why newer platforms come into our conversation here and there as well. But I still do think Instagram for the next few years too is in that perfect position of giving us all the options, having the audience, having the community, but still giving us reasonable ways to reach that audience. So that's why Instagram is perfect for me. To break that down into what those features are and what those opportunities are, I like to look at it in 3 different points of view. So the first point of view is from that main feed, right? Whenever we hop on social media, that is typically where we are scrolling through to see all the accounts we follow, their latest piece of content, whatever they have to share. That's where we get most of our information. And that's really where brands or entrepreneurs are going to have the most opportunities to get themselves out there. On that main feed, we have photos, right? If that's someone's style. We have carousel posts, which are photos that are at least 2 slides or more. So if anyone doesn't know, those are the ones you can swipe through, super fun, super interactive. My personal bread and butter. We have up to 60-second videos. And then you can start to also put things like Reels and like IGTV in there. But I don't say those are native to the main feed. They're kind of optional, Reels and IGTV. So mainly photos, carousels, and those short videos. Going along with that feed, that's where you really want to get those likes and those comments, right? Or those shares and those saves. So the main feed is really that first territory where Instagram hasn't changed a whole lot over the last 5-10 years. That's just original Instagram that we know and love. That's where most of our communication and most of our brand building really happens, in my opinion. From there, the second point of view or the second perspective you have to really approach your audience and your strategy from on Instagram is what I call the interactive feed. And I use this term because I've combined a few things here. Interactive feed is where I consider your stories, right? So there's a reason why every platform is now adding stories. Twitter added stories, LinkedIn added stories, right? YouTube has stories. It's getting a little bit ridiculous, but I think it's for good reason. Clearly, all the big platforms are taking notice of just how much potential stories have to interact with an audience. And also from their point of view, to put ads. Like if you can run stories on ads, that's where people are interacting and clicking and tapping the screen more than anywhere. So it's great for us as brands, personal brands and entrepreneurs, and it's great for the platforms. So our interactive feed are those stories. Also any lives we do. Live video was huge in 2020, and that's not slowing down at all in 2021. And finally, I also include our DMs, our direct messages, our private conversations in the interactive feed, because that's really where the magic happens. That's where you really get people to trust you, build that relationship, maybe onboard them as customers or clients, things like that. And finally, the third feed, I will say, this is the most experimental one, the brand new one, but I do think it deserves a feed of its own, is the Reels feed. As we know, Reels are taking Instagram by storm, whether we like it or not, but Instagram definitely wants us to use Reels right now. So it's definitely worth chatting about.
Yes, no, absolutely. So now let's go through those 3 that you talked about and how can we talk about we can leverage each of these. Let's start with the feed. And you mentioned carousel. And I have to be honest, I hated carousels until I saw the way that you were using it. And it set you apart because you weren't just giving me pictures, you were teaching me. You were telling me, okay, here's 3 tips on how to do Instagram stories or whatever it might be. And then I wanted to swipe because in order to get those 3 tips, I had to. So talk a little bit about how you're leveraging your carousel.
Yeah, and the way I'm going to break down these 3 feeds too is main feed is all about value. Interactive feed is all about relationships. Reels feed is more about entertainment, right? And things like that. So going back to that main feed, this is where you bring that value. This is your chance to, first of all, it's the most competitive, right? Most people, if they're going to use any of the 3 I've mentioned, they're going to be posting to the main feed almost daily, 3 times a week, 5 times a week, whatever their schedule is, right? So it's the most competitive, and that's where we really want to stand out. So like you introduced, carousels are a great opportunity to do that, because all algorithms, regardless of what platform, really prioritizes what we call dwell time, right? So dwell time is how long someone is staying on your piece of content versus anybody else's. Having a high dwell time benefits Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, whatever platform it is, because you are doing a great job keeping multiple users on that platform. If they're watching your video, if they are swiping through your carousel, if they're reading your nice long caption that's engaging, then they don't really have an option to leave and go to a different platform or to close the app and do something else. So that is huge from any social media platform's perspective. This is why carousels are great for Instagram, because carousels, someone's swiping down vertically, they stop on your post, and it really just breaks that pattern of swiping up and down, because on a carousel, they start swiping horizontally. They start swiping left and right, to go through your post. And as soon as you get someone breaking that pattern, you have up to 10 slides. You don't have to use all 10, but you have a huge opportunity to really keep them invested in your content, focused on what you're providing, getting your message across. And for that brief moment, you now have their attention, which is, I would say, the hardest thing to get in social media nowadays. If you can get attention, you've won it, right? That's what we want nowadays. Things move so fast. There's so many distractions. Get that attention and you're winning. So carousels are great at doing this because they keep someone engaged. And like you said, it's teaching. That's where you can really show what you know, build that trust, build your authority as an expert in your niche. And typically, that's what gets people to follow, because they go, you know what? This person just gave me 10 posts in one and I learned something. I'm going to follow them, and they'll probably comment their thoughts. So the conversion potential and the interaction potential is huge. And finally, my favorite, they usually get saves. And saves are in my opinion, the ultimate metric for boosting the algorithm. Because again, if someone saves your post, they tell Instagram, I already viewed this once, but I like it so much, I'm saving it. So I'm going to come back again, or a third time, or a fourth time. And Instagram says, well, they just multiplied their dwell time. Let's push this to more people. Let's get this on the explore page. Let's get this on hashtags and whatnot. So I always say value is what your priority is on the main feed. Stand out and bring as much as you can. And carousels are a great way to do that, in my opinion.
Yes. No, I entirely agree, and have seen clients that I have said, watch what Lucas is doing. Look, he's doing carousels. Try it. They then have tried it, and they're seeing it as making a huge difference. So can we go to talking a little about stories and how you are really leveraging those?
Definitely. And I love stories. I love stories and lives. And I pair them together for a reason. I think the main thing, people always ask me how I got my audience so big on Instagram. So it's pushing 60,000 right now. And it's growing quite quickly. And people always ask me, how'd you do that? And I always say, I stood out. I was unique. Not unique in any particular way, but just unique in the sense that I was myself, right? I was showing up on video, which has a huge impact nowadays because it's a pattern interrupt. So many people are used to just photos, static images. But if someone's in your face on a story or on a video or even on a reel, you're going to probably pay attention to them. So stories are huge for that. And this is actually perfect because I just gave all that info about carousels. And like you said, starting off making carousels, it's not a fun process in the beginning, right? They can be very time consuming. It's like you're making a mini PowerPoint presentation every time. So even though most of my content strategy is very carousel heavy, I don't always recommend that for everyone because people have so many other obligations. They're running businesses typically, they have family, right? They have their personal life. You have a lot of things to do. And unless you're outsourcing and have a really good content creator, it's difficult to keep consistent with carousels. So I say people only need to make 1 or 2 a week. And the more you create them, the more you use a consistent template. Canva is wonderful for that, obviously. The easier it gets. So it will feel long in the beginning. But stories are amazing because they really offset that long content creation process. And stories are super casual, right? You just hop on. In my situation, a ring light is a must. I love having a ring light. Turn that thing on, and I am just going to chat about whatever I posted about, whatever's on my mind, whatever I have to share. And it can be completely personal. It can be casual. It can be funny. And that's the nice thing. Typically, I wouldn't want to post these kind of topics on my main feed. It might affect how people view me as a professional. People might say, he talks about himself too much on his main feed. I'm going to unfollow him. I followed for the value from his carousels. Now he's changing too much. So stories are a great way for people to get to know me and to bond with me and trust me. That my main feed doesn't allow me to do. So I love just sharing those stickers, share a fun fact about me, about my past, and the amount of people who will DM me or reply to my stories saying just the things you never know, right? It'll be like, oh my gosh, Lucas, I have that same lamp from IKEA. And it had nothing to do with my story. But just because I happened to film in that room of my house that had that IKEA lamp, I now have this person DMing me. We're building a relationship. They're now going to feel much closer to me than just some random stranger on social media. So that's why stories really are magical, and they connect to the DMs, and they are a quick and effective channel to get to those DMs.
And one of the things that I always love to talk about with those DMs is Instagram views those then when you get into the DM as a friend, as someone that's going to continue to have conversation with them. So because of that, they then appear to affect the algorithm and start showing more of your content, whether it's moving your story bubble up or whether it is making sure that your feed is actually in part of their home feed. So those direct messages, I always love talking about the fact that those really truly weigh heavily into the content that you're putting out.
And 100% I can confirm that. The algorithm, one of its three focuses is relationships, and particularly, like you said, two-way relationships, right? So not all just one-sided. If two people are DMing back and forth, if they're commenting on each other's stuff, if they're watching each other's stories, the algorithm, like it's personalized, every single user will say, okay, we can keep this person on the platform if we show them more stuff from their friends, because everybody likes chatting with their friends. So let's show them more of this person's stuff and let's prioritize that. So it is a huge way to get your content seen. I think we've all experienced this or hopefully we've all experienced this, where you'll be DMing someone and maybe they're brand new. Maybe you haven't known them for too long, but you'll have a good chat with them. You'll DM them back and forth for a bit. And then sure thing, all that following week, you're seeing their posts on the main feed more than anybody else, right? So it's definitely a pattern we see, and we know Instagram has spoken about the importance of relationships for the algorithm.
Yes, no, 100%. I've definitely noticed that, especially if the conversation has started in Clubhouse, which then has gone directly into DMs, which I do love the fact that Clubhouse makes it so easy to be able to connect to Instagram and have those conversations. But my feed, like the next day, has totally changed because of all those conversations that were happening from those rooms on Clubhouse. So I love that. So now talk to me about how to leverage Reels a little bit. Not a ton, because I know that Reels are very, there's a lot to them, but how can we leverage those as well?
Definitely. Like Reels can be like a multiple podcasts of their own, just entirely on Reels. But the main thing I will say about Reels, and this is something I'm pretty consistent in advising people on, I always say try Reels. Okay. We know Instagram is prioritizing Reels. We know that even posting one Reel per week will actually make the rest of your main feed content perform better, which is very interesting. Okay, so just posting one Reel, let's say on Mondays, for example, it doesn't matter what day, but 1 week spaced out will make every following piece of content for that week perform better. And Instagram has also commented on this and how this helps. But the most important thing I can say on this note, try them. If they're not for you, if you don't think it's your best way to communicate, your best way to bring value, and if you feel like you're just doing them because you know they're the hype right now and that Instagram wants us doing them, then I always say don't, then stop there, right? When used by someone who knows the platform, especially if you're coming over from TikTok, right? Because that's where I honestly just keep TikTok on my phone still as a chance to just look through the latest trends and to see what people are doing and to learn the communication style. And it's very beneficial for me in that regard, even though I'm not really active on the platform. But I use some of the things I learned there on Reels. So I say, try it out. If it works for you, then go with it, because we know it's a great way to double, triple, whatnot you're following. And Instagram loves that. But if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel like the best way to communicate your message, and I'd say most importantly, if your audience doesn't seem to like it, then cut back, go back to what has worked for you all this time. That's going to be most beneficial, regardless of any benefits that the Reels reach will give us.
Yes. Okay. So now we've talked about these 3 different ways that we can use Instagram. What that also brings up, of course, is a ton of content, right? How do I go about making all of this content and working into a kind of a process? So do you have a process for putting out sufficient content of each of these that Instagram is looking for?
Yes. So the first thing I will say on that note that I always apply to myself is go for what's going to allow you to be consistent over time, right? So we all hear about these content sprints, right? Where it's like post every day for 30 days and see how much you grow and whatnot. And ultimately, the consistent output from that is burnout. People who feel exhausted, they do it for 30 days, but then they need 30 days of not posting or 2 weeks of not posting to recover, right? Which is the last thing we want. And what I always say is it actually hurts your account more to go for these sprints and then to have to take 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off. What you really want to prioritize is a routine that you can maintain over time. Even if that is, like I said, 3 times per week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you can commit to that, and you know Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a commitment that will allow you to post for 6 months straight without mixing up your schedule, then that is going to be so much better than posting every day for a month and then having to stop and take a break. So go for consistency over time. And you can always add in some variation there. Maybe on a Saturday, you're feeling like posting a casual post, or you saw like a meme in your niche that you feel like sharing. You can totally do that, right? So it doesn't mean you have to, it doesn't mean you can't add to your schedule, but find a bare minimum that you can maintain. That's what I always do. From there, I like to look at the core messages that are going to allow me to bring the most value to my audience when I'm creating content. And a few great places I like to look for these are in your own content, first of all. I love to go to my insights. And like I said, saves are my favorite Instagram metric that people can use to interact with my post. I go to my insights every few months and I select the option to say, sort them by most saves. And then I look at what pieces of content got 500, 1,500, 2,000 saves. And I say, you know what? This is definitely an evergreen topic that people really found a lot of value from. My audience is always in flux. I'm always gaining new audience or losing audience. They're always changing. So every 2 months, I will actually recreate some of my previously best performing posts. I will redesign them a little bit, maybe update any new information that's needed, and change the wording here and there. But it makes it much easier to create the content and to know I'm going to have a high performing topic. So I suggest that to everyone. I say, look at what has already worked and then keep doing it. Don't do it too close in between. And always track your insights. If it looks like it's starting to underperform, maybe you've done it too often and people are starting to catch on. But if something has worked, keep on repeating it. And that is a huge aspect of my content creation that I've been relying on since day one.
So smart. And it's because you're not reinventing the wheel, right? We all talk about the fact that we're overwhelmed and we're time strapped and we don't have enough time to do all these different things. So actually using something that we know is going to perform is so much smarter than trying to just create new content every single time. So I love that. If you were to tell us to do one thing on Instagram, what would it be?
I hope this doesn't sound cliche, but I will say stand out, right? And again, this is something that shouldn't be a huge surprise, but look at the ways, obviously take inspiration from what works for other people too, right? It's okay to look at what other people are doing and to learn from it and maybe modify your style to replicate that, because if it's working for them, it'll probably work for you. Obviously make sure it's in your own style as well, though. I can't stress that enough. But beyond that, if you fall into too much of a pattern of just doing what everybody else is doing, and I think across any niche, this can be a problem, right? we can see people who are just kind of like the copycats, and you're no longer known as, like, I might not be known as Lucas. I might be known as that guy who makes content that is similar to that other big account, right? Which is the last thing I want. I want to be known as Lucas, who makes Lucas's content, has Lucas's community, and people like it. And I'm sure from like an influencer and brand point of view that you could add, and I'm sure this is the first thing brands want to see, is that you have your own unique audience and you're not just a copycat or, blending in. You want to stand out. So I say make sure you're doing that. And truly, I think going on lives and going on stories as frequently as you can, and making sure it's obviously worthwhile and valuable, is the best way to do that, because nobody can accuse you of copying lives. Nobody can accuse you of copying someone else's stories. Again, I like to do story challenges. I like to share story prompts, and they're the exact same story prompts. And sometimes my community of a couple hundred people on Monday doing the exact same story prompt, but nobody is accused of copying each other, because the way someone shares a story that is just, share 2 truths and a lie about yourself. That's today's story. The way that I record that story is nowhere similar to the way the other 250 people record that story. So use those options, stories and lives, to really stand out and be unique.
Yes, it's all about the positioning and creating that personal brand for yourself. And it's funny that you bring up the 2 truths and a lie, because I think I had seen you do those story prompts a couple of weeks ago when you were doing them on a Monday probably, and did it. And I think normally stories, I don't re-record, but I think I messed it up like 6 times when I went to record it, because I kept getting tongue-tied with the 2 truths and a lie, and I kept saying 2 lies and a truth. And then I would giggle every time I would do the lie. So it was obvious. I'm a terrible liar. What it was actually my lie. And even after I recording it a bunch of times, people came back and they're like, it was so obvious. You smirked when you lied. Like, you can't do this. But there were tons of conversations because of that. So that ended up happening in my DMs. And then, of course, again, it's all about that algorithm and the engagement. So, Lucas, you have a story guide. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And we're going to make sure that we link to it in the show notes, but tell us a little bit about what it is.
So the main thing I find that is keeping people off stories is not knowing what to talk about, even more so than being camera shy. I think because we don't have to always show our face on stories. Like, people do stories really well and don't have to show their face. They don't even have to be on video. It can just be images. Again, use Canva, use the features that Instagram gives us. So I think the biggest obstacle is not knowing what to talk about. And I think it's because we train ourselves to always have to bring value in the main feed. So when it comes to stories, we're burnt out of all those valuable topics, and we don't know anything casual or anything that is actually, pitching our offer. We're afraid to kind of share those. So what I've done is I've just compiled a guide of hundreds of different story prompts that have been organized based on your goal or your priority. Those can be, casual conversation starters, which as you just shared with your example, those are huge, because those get those DMs, those get those fun conversations that you don't expect people to reply to in the way they reply. So that's huge. I've divided into prompts that are about, pitching your offer, talking about your latest partnership or your product. Because again, stories are a great place to sell, right? No one's going to get too put off if you're talking about selling in the stories, because they're casual. People, if they don't want to hear about your sales pitch, they can move on, right? But stories are a great place to do that without making your main feed seem too salesy. And then there are other ones like awareness boosters that are going to get you tagging other people and hopefully having them do the same, and value bringers. So this is just my guide I've used personally to really boost my own engagement. And I'm happy to share all these prompts with other people as well.
Perfect. So we're going to link to that in the show notes. We obviously know we can connect to you on Instagram at the Lucas O'Keefe. Is there anywhere else that you would say best to connect with you?
I would just stick with Instagram. That is where I'm spending most of my time, and probably will be for the foreseeable future. So Instagram would be perfect at the Lucas O'Keefe.
I love it. Perfect. We are going to link to obviously that in the show notes as well. If you guys are listening, please take a screenshot, put it up there, put it onto your stories, and tag both Lucas and I, and we'll make sure to reshare those. Lucas, I appreciate you taking the time so much to speak with me and my audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I am hoping that by now you have already followed Lucas. I could not have mentioned his Instagram handle more times than I already did in that episode. So you're going to @TheLucasO'Keefe on Instagram to make sure that you are following him for all the latest tips that he is giving and handing out, but also to kind of see the way that he is doing the things that he talked about in those 3 pieces of Instagram features that we talked about during this episode. I appreciate you guys so much when you leave a review on your favorite podcasting app. It just makes it so much easier for me to be able to lock down great guests like Lucas. So if you haven't already left me a review, I would absolutely love it if you did. Send me a screenshot. I appreciate it so much when you do, so that way I can share it on Instagram. Again, you have any questions, I will be sure to answer them. You can find me at Jenny_Melrose on Instagram. And again, Lucas is at @TheLucasO'Keefe. All right, you guys, until next time, I will see you all then.